with Kim Ayres, episode 125. So today I'm going to be talking about, what do I call this? A smudging of time. Basically, I'm going to be looking a bit at the notion of how when you take a photo which is a kind of long exposure, you're essentially exposing time onto a two-dimensional surface, which can sometimes have the sort of feel of smudging it on a level. Part of this comes out of a thing I did for Kirkcudbright galleries. I'll tell you what, I'll explain all that in a moment. Really what I want to just, first of all, here we are live on YouTube. Leave a comment, let me know you're here, and where you're from, what the weather's like, and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we'll make a start on on the podcast. So yes, what do I want to talk about? What I'm going to talk about is the fact that some of you may remember back in. Tell you what, before I get to that, let's just do the hellos. I can see we've got a few comments already, so let's I see Patsin says hi from sunny Somerset. Meg says hello everyone, and Maggie says hello from an autumnal Castle Douglas. It definitely is. Well, I suppose we are in the middle of October, it's kind of, but it is damp and cold at the moment. Fiago says greetings everyone. Nick Bath says hello from Bath. I presume then that, are you Nick from Bath? Right, okay. Rosemary says, good morning from Washington State, where wildfire smoke is currently creating a most gorgeous sunrise. Well, I'm glad for your sunrise, but I do hope that you're not in any danger there, Rosemary. Andy says hello. Glad you could make it along, Andy. I will be looking at your photos earlier that you sent in for critique. April says hello everyone from a sunny Long Island, New York. John says hello from Ohio, back from a 2-week road trip. That sounds like fun. Look forward to seeing what you came up with for that. Right, okay, so we have people in, we have a topic to talk about. So let's talk about a topic. So basically, some of you who've been around for a little while may remember back earlier in the year, around the beginning of the year, I was doing some work for the Kirkcudbright galleries. And there was an exhibition up in the Mitchell Gallery called the taken from the Mackinnon Collection. The Mackinnon Collection itself is a set of 14,000 photos dating between about 1850 and 1950, and a selection of about 40 or so of them were on show in the Kirkcudbright galleries. On the back of that, we ran a competition to create a kind of local. We got people to send in their images of the local surrounding area of Stewartry district, to kind of around Kirkcudbrightshire, and me along with Blake, who was the curator of the Mackinnon Collection, plus a couple of other people from the galleries themselves, we selected images for an exhibition. That exhibition is now running. I went along to the preview on Friday, so if you can get to Kirkcudbright, you can take a look at the photos that were put in. They've all been printed out, put on the wall, and the exhibition runs until the 8th of January, I think, 8th of January 2023. Now, one of the other things I also did for Kirkcudbright galleries was I did a set of photos of a day in the life, and the whole idea was to do a literal kind of snapshot of a single day in at the Kirkcudbright galleries. Now, I haven't shown these photos of yet, but what I did do, what has happened, is I created a set of photos, and then I also made up a video. It's about 5 minutes long, and I came up with this title, I suppose, of a smudging of time, to reflect the fact that some of the photos I did were long exposure. And I'm going to show you some of those. Now, the 5-minute video itself is currently on display up in the Mitchell Gallery, so you can go and see these photos that were sent in. But there's a little kind of ante-room to one side which has a video screen, and that the video which shows some of the photos I took, along with a talk over from me, is kind of is on display there also until the 8th of January. So the photos that I took, this idea of a day in the life, we picked a day that that the place was going to be open, I was going to be free, and essentially I went there at opening time, embedded myself for the day, and took photos. Now, when you're going to do something like that, there's a lot of kind of decisions to be made: artistic decisions, aesthetic decisions, technical decisions. And one of the key things about all this was, sorry, I just realised that I don't actually have a little light on in the background. One of the key things of this was the weather and the lighting. Now, if you're at the front, if you're in the cafe area, which is upstairs, there's some nice big windows, and on a bright day, there's plenty of light falling in. The galleries themselves don't tend to have any windows, so they are much darker. They are just the whatever overhead or forgotten the word now, the lights that where you sort of point down onto paintings, kind of rail lights and what have you. It's whatever lighting that's there, and then very often these lighting is quite low light as well, because a lot of paintings and prints and what have you will fade or damage if they're exposed to strong light. So the galleries themselves have quite low lighting. Then there's various bits of the building, stairwells and what have you, which again don't necessarily have a lot of light. But then even where there was light, the day we did the shoot was a very dull, overcast day where it was also raining for part of it as well. So there just wasn't much light at all. So what am I going to do in a very low light condition? Well, two things happened really. I had the option, if I try and introduce light, which essentially is going to be like off-camera flashes going off or on-camera flashes, then essentially every time I take a photo, everybody in the area is going to know. And I wanted to be a bit more discreet than that. What I wanted to do was, you kind of, okay, some people, they start off, they're aware somebody's prowling around with a camera. In fact, we even had to warn people when they came into the galleries, they were told at the foyer that there was going to be a person around with a camera, and if they didn't want to be included in the photo, if they had an absolute horror of it, then they were to leave their name and what have you, so that, or even to wear like a little sticker or something, so that I should be aware of the fact that I either didn't photograph them, or if I got back later on, looked on the computer and found that I got somebody with a sticker on them, then I didn't include that photo in the collection. As it was, we didn't in the end actually have to worry too much about that. I didn't have any photos which had anybody with a sticker on, and I don't know how many people took up on that offer. However, what I didn't want to do was disturb anybody's experience of going around the galleries. They've gone there to look at the pictures, to go to the cafe. And if you've got flashes going off and frying their eyeballs, it's not going to be much fun for anybody. So I kind of had to work in the ambient light. So that meant when I was going handheld, very often I was running at about 1,000, 1,500 ISO, which, as you'll know from your own experience, anybody who messes around with the ISO can make the images quite noisy. So kind of tying in with this, what we decided to do was, what I would also do is I would make them black and white. Black and white always has a sort of slightly, because black and white is abstracting reality. We don't view reality in black and white unless you have a particular kind of colour blindness. Most of us don't. So as soon as we see a black and white photo, we're aware it's not reality as we're used to experiencing reality. When you see a colour photo straight on, you can kind of feel like that's reality. A black and white photo, you know, isn't. And so in a way, when you're kind of creating an art project for something, then black and white moves it into the realm of art a little bit more sometimes. Or it makes it easier, or it just sort of shifts the mind of the viewer. So we decided that the whole collection would be in black and white. It also black and white, as we've talked before, for anybody who remembers this, if you've got a particularly grainy, noisy photo that's happened, because you've had to go for high ISO, quite often dropping it into black and white gets rid of the colour noise, but again, it tends to then imitate the idea of grain from the analogue photo days, which always feels that little bit more acceptable to look at, because we remember old black and white photos that were quite grainy, but they were all right. There was a context for them, and so sometimes we can get away with black and white photos that are grainy easier than we can cope with the idea of colour photos that are noisy. So this whole combination, so we decided black and white. I was just going to have to use high ISO, which would be noisy, so that was helped by the black and white when I was doing handheld. The other option as well then was to use the tripod and to do slow shutter speed. Now, slow shutter speed works fine on anything that's not moving. If I take a photo of a cup or a wall or a staircase, that's not going anywhere. But if somebody happens to be lifting that cup or walking on that staircase, then suddenly they're going to be out of focus. So rather than actually worrying about that being a problem, could we possibly make it a feature? And so I decided to take quite a few photos where actually people were deliberately blurred. And then they became part of that collection of the photos. So what I'm going to do now then is I'm going to show you some of the photos I took to give you a sense of what it is I'm talking about. And just to say as well, after I've done this bit, we'll then go on to the critique section where Robert and Andy have both put in images to talk about. But in the meantime, let me double click on that, swap over to here. So this is the outside of Kirkcudbright Galleries. It's a large old kind of Victorian, I think, or is it, just Edwardian? Anyway, it's somewhere on there. I think there might even be a date. It used to be the town hall. It's a red sandstone building. Well, you can see at the top here, it's actually says at one point, at the point that it was built, it was a library, town hall and museum all in one. And then a few years ago, it was converted into a gallery space, but a kind of place there. They do have local exhibitions, but also there's permanent collections and there are touring exhibitions. And it's now become, if you're kind of looking for galleries and places to visit in Scotland, this is now kind of one of those on the trail to go to. So you don't have to necessarily go to the big cities to see some quite amazing exhibitions. Currently, there's a touring exhibition in there on Raymond Briggs, the children's author, author and illustrator. So I've not had a chance to see it yet. I'm desperate to get in and see it. So I will be heading down there later this month to make sure I think that runs until the end of October. So anyway, this is the building. This gives you now. One of the things I could have done in a day in the life of, that's my remit, is I could have just set up my camera here and then just photographed everybody as they went into the building and came out of the building. And so you've got a choice there to say, how do you decide to interpret a brief like that? In the end, I felt that would be fairly boring. Also, it might put some people off going into the building if they can see somebody standing there with a camera. It kind of feels a bit too surveillance and a bit intrusive, and like you haven't really given any kind of permission for doing so. Whereas anybody who went in to the building was told about me doing the photography, and so therefore essentially gave permission to be involved, to be pictured in any photos I happen to take. So some of the photos then I went round. As I moved through the building, I was kind of capturing things to begin with. So we've got people at work. Here we've got somebody in one of the staircases. There's a central part that comes up and it's got glass, and the glass just gets smudged. I was chatting to her for a while and this becomes one of those almost never-ending jobs. I think the moment you kind of clean the glass off, the following day you go back, there's fingerprints and smudges and dust all over it. So you have to kind of go up and start all over again. So you've got three flights of stairs and what have you of this glass to kind of polish. But it's trying to get a sense of, okay, so this is just something that's going on. I'd never even thought about this until I was in there for the day with the camera, moving around, and you catch people doing things. So you've got that kind of thing. You've got this, again, this woman here, she'd just been cleaning the mirror in the lift, the elevator, I think, as you say, on the other side of the Atlantic. And that's quite an interesting little space as well. So catch a shot of her. We did some. While you've got the galleries, there are little doorways to other parts of behind the scenes where pictures are kept, and then the curators and the runners and the people who actually run the galleries can store paintings and then bring them out or clean them up or pack them away. And so I was allowed access to sort of the back rooms as such in order to be able to take some photos here. One of the other things that you might notice, of course, is people are wearing masks. There was an interesting thing on Friday when I went along to the preview for that exhibition I was saying about, is I was chatting away to Shona, who's on the left here, And she was saying about when they were looking back at these photos ready for that video that's gone in with the exhibition, how dated it seemed. That just in the course of 7 or 8 months since we actually did the photos, the world has changed again. There are now different people running the cafe. There's different exhibitions on in the rooms, and of course, back at that point, a mask I think was pretty much compulsory, and there was hand gel at every corner. Whereas now there's hand gel when you go in and out of the building if you wanted, but it's no longer considered compulsory. It's not compulsory to wear a mask anymore. So this notion of you capture a day in the life of a building or a place, and it's amazing just how quickly it then becomes historic. The time you capture it, this day is very similar to the day before or the day afterwards. And we know that in 20 years' time, we'll look back and go, oh, different hairstyles, different layouts, different wallpaper or whatever. But somehow you don't expect that just in the space of in less than a year, in barely more than half a year, actually how much things could change as well. Another kind of shot of this kind of behind the scenes, unpacking or packing up, a picture. Just taking shots of some of the shots of the building. This part, and one of the other stairwell. And in this case, there you are with the camera. You're looking for lines. You're looking for interesting shapes. So tilting it on the diagonal to get these kind of, rather than just sort of square, just trying to create a little bit more energy. But again, these signs here where you've got the footprints, you can see. So this is what they were doing. They were using sort of one set of stairs to go up and another set of stairs to go down, creating a single line to go through the building, which of course was part of the COVID regulations. And so you can see the footprints in the corner here pointing in this direction, and you can see a no entry pointing in the other direction, so that anybody coming in from the left here knows they can't be going down. Anybody coming up the stairs can see that they're on the right track. So again, these things no longer there. Similarly, there's a little sign on the wall here says, please wear your face covering at all times in this building. Again, that's no longer there. So another part of it here, I spent quite various bits of the day sitting in the cafe. The cafe was first of all, it was a lovely cafe. It did a really good cup of coffee, but it was also a good place to watch as things went past, as people went past. The light changed. And what I also quite liked about this place was, from the cafe here, you can just kind of look in the background, the way they sort of done up this building. There was this sort of 4-level bit going on over here. So here you can see that you've got the cafe underneath, and then there's this sort of little mezzanine bit up here with some seats. But if you pull out here, you can see, again, cafe area down the left, the mezzanine here, and the stairwells, the stairs going up. And actually, that previous photo of the stairs, I was sort of up on the floor above this, pointing down in this direction. So you would have had those little footprint stickers would have been just sitting on that level there. And that little round bit saying wear a face covering would have been just out of sight, just behind there on the wall. But I liked that kind of, I thought that was an interesting shape. So when you're sort of doing a day in the life of, there's the people, but it's the building as well. So you're looking for these kind of shapes to get a feel of what the building is like. Or this one here where I'm sitting having the coffee, and now we've got people coming in to the cafe. They're waiting to be served and seated. But you've also got someone up here cleaning the rails. So we've got these kind of split things going on as well. And this was quite fun. And at times, so sitting there with the coffee, I can be patient. I can wait until 2 of these places are occupied, which I think creates a little bit more interesting in the layout. Or up one end, here we go. Coffee being brought over. You can making the use of the lines and the shape of the building. Up on that little mezzanine, then looking down and getting a sense of everybody here. So these are the kind of things that I was doing with, I'm shooting at roughly something like 125th of a second, maybe f5.6, something like that. But in the brighter part here, maybe my ISO is about 400, 600. In the darker parts, I've maybe been going up to 1000 or even 1600 ISO. But what I then also was doing was I started to sort of, like I say, sort of playing around with the idea of slow shutter speed. And then this sort of same cafe, if I coming down to just on the floor below here, setting up there with the camera on the tripod, and then looking back along here. Now this one, if I can just find it, this here, because it's quite bright and I've got this on ISO 100 now. But because it's quite bright, I've gone for an f22, so I've got to go for a really narrow aperture in order to be able to do a 2-second exposure. And that 2-second exposure, across that 2 seconds, you've got some people, like the wee kid here is sort of sitting, she hasn't obviously moved much. Mum or Gran has moved their head a little bit. Some people are sitting fairly still. Other people have moved quite a lot. Waitress has moved fair way down the thing. There's another one here moving backwards and forwards. And this is where you start to get that sense of time smudging as such, which I really quite like. I liked that kind of mix of movement and stillness within people. I felt there was something really quite interesting about it. And so I started to develop that much more as the day went on. So here's a shot of the foyer, for example. So you come in through the main doors on the left here, and you walk in, and then you kind of register and sort of, and then you go up the stairs here. The cafe bit is up on this floor just above these lights here. So you come up the stairs here, and this one then is f10 eighth of a second, ISO 200, and I've got it on the tripod. But tenth of a second. These people are fairly static. These ones are moving very slowly up. You're not really getting a lot of movement. You can start to see her heel moving a little bit in there. There's not a lot happening in the space of a tenth of a second. But we move on to here, and in this one, where are we? I'm now going for a full second, a whole 1 second of f18 100 ISO. 1 second, and during this 1 second, we've now got people moving through this door. We've got somebody moving around in the shop. We've got somebody stepping forward in the queue. And what I really love is this person here, who we have no idea. They have moved enough so that they are barely or a shadow on the wall. And I kind of love this. There's something really fascinating about this whole idea of this sort of long exposure with people in it. And this really does give you that sense of smudging. Time smudging is just great. And again, at the time, there was the Galloway Horde, the exhibition, which was an amazing exhibition, which of course is no longer there. Here in the shop, which, if I go back here, which is the little shop area on the left, over here, you've got people moving, you've got this, and you get these lovely kind of very abstract lines of the hands moving, of the heads moving from side to side. But because it's on a tripod, sitting at that kind of, everything else is static, and we're deliberately playing with that notion of movement. In one of the galleries here, everybody was standing around. This guy was giving a talk about some of the paintings. You can see that the people are sort of little bits of blinking going on where the eyes are kind of sort of slightly blurred here. She obviously didn't blink. He's gesturing. Most of his body's still, but the arm is waving up and down. Or we have the likes of this one where the man is very kind of still, woman's starting to move into the space. Upstairs on another level, everybody's fairly still in their part, but apart from this guy, who in the course of is that 1 second, what's the timer on this one? This is a third of a second. And so in the case of a third of a second, this is how much he's moved across the floor, creating that amount of space. But then down in the gallery where the horde, the Galloway Horde actually was, the light was very low. And in this one, I've got a 5 second exposure. So, for most of after these, I was then working at a 5 second exposure to keep it on 100 to 200 ISO. This one again, I particularly like. You see some people, like this one here, very static. They're obviously kind of reading the text, not moving very far. Whereas these people here, this person's moved that bit more. This person is obviously a person who's sort of getting up from the bench, I guess. You know, this left foot hasn't moved much, right foot has started to move. So you can tell that as they move, they keep their weight on the left leg and they start to come up. You always get a little bit forensic with this, which is kind of fun. And then possibly my favourite photo of the lot is this one, because we've got a real mix here. We've got this couple here, they're watching a video all about the Galloway Hoard, how the Viking treasure was found, and the story behind it, and some of the amazing stuff they found within the collection. You've got this woman here who's clearly blurred. You can see part of the background behind her. She's stepped into the space and then paused for a bit. Paused long enough to feature, but not been there long enough for the background to be completely, so the background is still showing through her. This guy I love. We've got, bent down looking at this, then straightens up, or maybe he was straight and then he bent down, I'm not sure. In the background here, we've got one of these ghostly shadows, and then down here, we don't even have the ghostly shadow of the rest of the figure. All we've got is a barely registered foot. So this photo, which is 5 seconds, 5-second exposure, goes from very static pieces to barely registered at all and various bits in between. And I just thought it was a lot of fun doing photos like this. And then just by the time it had all finished, we kind of then into the blue hour, and you go out onto the street, and here you've got a car driving past. At this point, what I've done is I've got a 15-second exposure, and I've set the camera on a tripod, and you've got a couple of cars have kind of come along and gone back. You can't see the car itself. All it's left is a streak of lights that's run from the top end of the street right down to the bottom, or maybe it's on its way up. Maybe that's the light coming forward, and then it's disappeared off the screen. So in that space of 15 seconds, you can't see the car at all. All you can see is the smudge of light in the time across it. And then just as a final kind of fun one, this was me in that very same lift that the woman was cleaning earlier, doing a selfie. So that's really kind of what I wanted to talk about. That's kind of what I wanted to show you, was this idea of, when I talk about smudging time, that you could take, set up your tripod and allow people to move across. And if you've got it on the tripod, if you've got it in a 2-second, 5-second, 15-second exposure, and you're in an interesting place, find an interesting kind of what looks interesting architecturally, and then allow the people to move through it. And I think there's these kind of ghostly figures, these sort of smudged, not fully there figures. There's something about it I just really love. So I was quite pleased with the way they turned out. Unfortunately, Kirkcudbright Galleries was delighted with it too. Okay, I've got a few comments here. Let's see what we've got. So Andy says, did you give a lot of consideration to the lenses for this project? Yes, I mean, basically what I did here was I used a wide angle lens for this. For nearly all the pictures, I had a 10 to 22 millimeter wide angle lens on it. And that for two reasons. One is I wanted to be able to get in that kind of architectural space. I knew I was going to be in the building, and wherever I wanted to kind of get a sense of the building itself and not just the people in the building or a small aspect of the building, then I use the wide angle lens. The other advantage of the wide angle lens is that you get more depth of field for your aperture. Basically, anybody who's kind of is a bit more savvy about the use of lenses, if you've got, like, the more of a zoom lens you've got, if you're going up to 100mm, 200mm, 300mm lenses, then say you've got something like an f5 and you're zoomed right in, your depth of field might only be this big. Whereas when you zoom out, when you come out and you're down to 80mm, 50mm, 20mm, an f5 gives you a much greater depth of field. So your aperture and your depth of field isn't the same for all lenses. Your wider angle lens you are, the more depth of field you have for any given aperture than you do on a zoom lens. So knowing that I was going to be in a low light situation, essentially having a wider angle lens gave me, I could get more depth of field for the wide aperture to let more light, which I had it on to let more light in. The problem is if I'd had something like a zoom lens, if I'd gone for you end up having a wide aperture in order to let more light in, but then you end up with a very narrow depth of field, and the bit in the foreground is going to be in focus, everything else is going to be out of focus. Now there's bits where I did play with that. There was a photo of a cup somewhere, I think, where this one here, where I'm very deliberately playing with the idea of just focusing on the cup and allowing the background to be out of focus. But even then, I'm using the wide angle lens, but I'm getting close in on a 3.5 aperture, I think. So there were times when, and then I think there's a couple of others where I did actually put a different lens on for particular shots, but mostly it was the wide angle lens. So I hope that makes sense. What else have we got here? Meg says, I really like the different lines inside the building. Yeah, and I think that was an important bit to try and get, was the sense of that architecture and the way that they changed the space. Rosemary says, the ghosting smudges really do feel like old-time film prints from long ago. Yeah, and I think when you add in that notion of black and white and also that sort of slight graininess to the images, it probably accentuates that even more. April says it's cool with blur moving of photography with the ones that are not blurred. And yeah, and I think that's where it works at its best, is when you've got some people who are not and some people who are, because the ones who are not are kind of anchoring the picture as such, and then that way it also looks less like a mistake. It looks more like you deliberately intended to do it. Rosemary says the smudges of movement really enforce the concept that this is just a day. Time moves on. Couple that with the masks and the footprints, and it really does show how time moves. And that's very true. And and like I say, the surprise for us was that within only a matter of a few months, you can see just how much time has moved on. Maggie says, I love the blurred movement images, engaging with the space as well as the exhibits. Yes, I think, again, yes, it's about then the exhibits aren't just the exhibits on their own. That sense of happening within it was a really important part. That this was to do a day in the life of Kirkcudbright Galleries wasn't just the case of photographing the building. It wasn't architectural photography or just interior photography. It was about people moving within that space. And April says, I also love the outdoor car blurred photography. I've seen some great shots in colour of that. Yes, and I do have a colour version of that, not immediately to hand. But yes, and it is quite interesting because I actually shot that at the blue hour, so the sky has got a kind of dark blue tinge in it, and then you've got red brake lights streak across the thing. So you get some kind of interesting kind of colour playing with that. Right, okay, so that's what I wanted to chat about there. I hope you all found that reasonably interesting. Right, so just a wee reminder here that if you find these podcasts interesting, useful, entertaining, then do consider supporting them with buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. That's a lovely way to support these podcasts. Another way is to tell your friends. And another way is to get involved. One of the things I do want to say, following on from last week, where I was talking about direction of where I'm going to go with the podcast, and I need your help for this. I want your input. And keeping to my promise from last week, in the Facebook page, I put up a post and basically said, your podcast needs you. What is it I did? Yes, this. Shove that up. I had intended to do the kind of finger pointing like the old kind of World War One little Kitchener, was it Kitchener or whatever pointing, or in America there's the Uncle Sam kind of the war poster call, your country needs you. I was just going to do a play on that. I didn't have the time to actually set up a photo to do it for myself, and then I wrote in the post that there's all these different kinds of aspects of photography Let me know which ones you're interested in. What would you like me to be talking more about? Where do you need help? How would you like to see these podcasts moving forward? Really hoping for a bit of input. So far, though, I've only had 2 people actually come up with any suggestions. I don't know whether Facebook wasn't showing the picture to anybody, or whether nobody can be bothered, or whether everybody thinks it's somebody else's responsibility, or just nobody really knows quite how to answer it. Have I asked the questions and that people don't know how to answer? Whatever the reason, there hasn't been much of a response. So I would ask if you could, if you're on Facebook, to go back, check out that post. I've now pinned it to the top of the Facebook page. Now, Facebook, if you're not on Facebook in the group yet, go to Facebook, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, type that in, you'll find the group, you can join it. But please, give me some feedback on the kind of photography that I can help you with. What do you want to know about? Okay, because if you want to know about it, there will be somebody else watching who will also want to know about it. Without the feedback, everything on my side is just complete guesswork. And, you know, maybe I'm doing quite well, maybe I'm not. But I certainly operate a lot better if I can get a bit of feedback and know whether I'm on the right lines or not. I do these podcasts to help you, to help anybody, whether it's you watching right at this moment or you watching a recording of this at a later date. You know, but how can I help if I might be just sort of busy doing all the wrong stuff? I'm making this up as I go along. I'm not employed by anybody to do these podcasts. You know, these started during lockdown, and I just decided that, hey, let's have a go at doing something different with social media. So it's fun. I enjoy doing these, but I do them for other people. I enjoy the feedback I get. So it helps if you can kind of, so yeah, wee bit of a guilt trip. Maybe I'm trying to lay a little bit of a guilt trip on. What I'm trying to do really is get a little bit of action. I don't want to lay a guilt trip because actually that's the fastest way to turn off any viewers and you'll all run away. I know that. So. But if you have a moment, if you don't want to put anything into the Facebook group, then email me. I'm absolutely open to email. Some of you don't do Facebook, I know that. Some of you feel a bit self-conscious about writing anything publicly into a Facebook group, in which case email me one-to-one, we can have private conversations. kimayres.co.uk. So just kim@kimayres.co.uk. Any emails will get to me. Right, okay. With that in mind then is the critique section, which is also your chance to ask for feedback. So what I'm going to talk about now then is Andy. Andy sent me in 2 photos, which were, I love these photos, Andy, I really do. So what I'll do is, let me just show you the 2 photos. So we've got this one and we've got this one. So brilliant photos. One small editing thing with this, Andy, is clearly you've smudged somebody out here, but the fact is it's clear. I can see that it's been removed, and so it kind of grabs the eye a little bit. And one of those things with editing, I'm all for editing, absolutely feel. If whatever it was there was detracting, either because it was somebody who said, oi, I don't want to be in the photograph, or there was some, I don't know, object floating there which pulled the eye away from where you wanted, absolutely edit it. You really should. But with the editing, when you're doing the editing, your editing needs to be as seamless as possible, because if people see the edits, then they're not really seeing they get distracted from the story itself. However, having said that, I still love this photo. I think this is just brilliant. And it's a really nice, because of the way the steps are, because of the way you've caught it, you've got the people moving up the steps. We naturally follow the line of the people. We then follow the line of the steps, and we fall over, and then the feet. Oh, these feet are just perfect. I mean, you couldn't get a better point. If this person had been further up and just head going in first, that would have been one thing. If they'd been mid-air, that would have been another. But the actual legs just there, perfect timing. Absolutely love it. So that's one of your photos. And the other one, this one, really kind of observational. guy coming out, fantastic light. All you can get is that real sense of every kind of drip of water coming off. We feel what that water is like coming off this person. In fact, actually, I'm guessing from the colour of the trunks there, that's probably that person. But then we've got somebody else swimming. It's not just this person themselves, but the swimmer in the background, again, ramps it up a level. These are absolute top-notch photos, Andy. Now, what Andy says then is, I'm struggling to select one of these two images for a club open PDI competition. Not totally sure what PDI means, but anyway, club competition, open competition. I love the immediacy and dynamism of the two individuals in the swimmers, this one here, I guess, whereas I think the judge would favour, I think a judge would find more of a story and therefore favour in the St. Malo divers, which is presumably this one. It'll be interesting to know how you dissect this. So, yes, what's really kind of interesting here then is that there are the judge. It is going to, you do have two different narratives here, two different fields, two different moods, and different judges are going to favour different photos. Now, if you do have a judge who is looking particularly on the technical side, then your bit here is going to play against you. And in fact, actually, there's one or two other little bits here. There's an edit up here where that line doesn't quite line up properly with that one. And in fact, there's a little round spot here, which also doesn't line up. These things are fixable in Photoshop. And, or if you have something like Affinity or GIMP, the quality of your photos, you are editing your photos already, and I can tell that you know how to edit photos. So, I mean, no doubt you have the ability to fix the edits, and so I really would recommend it because they take away from what is otherwise a brilliant photo. Now, so if you've got a judge who is looking at that level of detail on technical, you essentially get marked down for something which doesn't need to be there. So always, if you're going in for the competition, get your technicals right on that side. That aside, once you've done that, what about the story? And I think, again, it's back to this kind of who's looking at it. And best as you can, you kind of have to judge your judge. Different judges and different... We've talked over the podcasts over the years. We've talked about the difference of what happens when you enter competitions. Now, one of the things I'm fairly certain of is there are certainly some kind of online photo crowd, Guru Shots, these kind of sites where this photo would work better. This photo works better because you do have the story, and it's an easy to grab story. And you've got such a fantastic line that comes up. Again, another little bit. Again, if I was going for something like an online crowd shot, so you're using one of these kind of online sites, I would turn this one into a landscape. Now, I don't know how well how much you've cropped. This feels to me like it needs a little... You're not quite square on this. You either go completely square, in which case I guess you would probably pull in to about there to make it a completely square one. But this pair of legs is fairly close to the right, so I would be tempted to sort of stretch that out. And if you had... Let's just do a content aware. This isn't going to look right, but it's just to give you an idea of something like that. Maybe it doesn't need to be quite as far as that. Yeah, something like that. So your legs over here are more or less on that kind of... So you're kind of going more rule of thirds-ish, where you've got this lot on the 1/3 level, you've got that lot kind of on a 3rd level across. So for that kind of instant appeal, if you're going for that fast appeal where people are going to look at a photo and make a very quick instant judgment, then I would say... We've noticed, we've talked before, been discovered that in these kind of online competitions and what have you, very often landscape works better than portrait. The winning images are nearly always landscape. very occasionally portrait, but it tends to play against you. So composition-wise, I think a little bit more like that. Maybe on your original photo, you've got the space to do that. I don't know. Maybe you don't. If you don't, then I would make it square rather than the not quite square. Again, you've got landscape, you've got portrait, you've got square. The almost square, if I grab that, what have we got? We've got it's 1600 pixels wide, 1360 high. It is the kind of feels like it's not quite right. So again, just on so you make it square by square, and then you just need to kind of pull that across just to kind of balance it a little bit more. So you would do something like that, I think. But these are for you to play with, Andy. And don't let this take away from the fact that I think these are wonderful photos. Now, the other thing then is this photo. What I'm so struck by with this photo is it is very kind of Martin Parr. It's American documentary. I've completely forgotten. There are a couple of kind of street photographers, American street photographers, who specialise in colour. A lot of street photography, black. There are street photographers I know who, think if you do anything other than black and white, you are the devil incarnate. But there are some who deliberately use colour. And in fact, actually, Martin Parr, British photographer, also uses colour. And this reminds me of a lot of that stuff. And this kind of photo, I can really see. Now, if you take, there's an online competition site called Lens Culture. And if you were to use Lens Culture, I think this kind of photo would absolutely fit in brilliantly with this. If you were submitting two photos to Lens Culture and you submitted this one and this one wouldn't do. This one for Lens Culture is almost too obvious. You've got the line. It's a very, very pleasing photo. But it's this one which is the slightly less obvious, I think, in terms of that easily consumed photo. This requires looking at. When I look at it once, I get one sense. I look at it twice, I start to see it again. And I look at it 3 times. Every single time I look at this photo, it grows on me. I like this photo more and more and more. When I first saw the first 2 photos, I liked this one first. As I look at them more and more, this one has now taken a very, very clear lead. I like this photo. But this is the point, really, Andy, is it's coming down to the judge and who's judging it and how much time the judge is giving it. If you are like in one of these online competitions where the judge is Joe Public and they are scrolling, they've got to vote on 100 images in order to fulfill their little bit so that they can then enter another photo or win a prize or get another reward or whatever it is. They are scrolling at high speed. And at that point, the most easily consumable photos score highest. So again and again and again, you see the misty sunset, you see the lone tree, you see the peeling paintwork, the ones that are kind of, we recognise as it's quite easy to get a reasonably good image at. But if you're talking about people who are full-time photographers who've seen these kind of photos all the time, if you are talking about people who are, probably more like your camera club, interclub competitions, if you're talking about things like Lens Culture or your Taylor Wessing Portrait Awards, and things like that, where you actually got professional photographers, experts in the field who will look. They've seen the lonely tree on the hill so many millions of times, they're sick to death of it. They see something like that, they see cliche. All they see is cliche, and it doesn't matter the fact that it will have won all sorts of awards on the crowd voting sites, it won't get a second look in on one of those. Whereas this would do extraordinarily well in one of those. Again, I look at it again, and it's lovely, and I love the line and the movement and the energy and the diagonals in this. I've talked often about the notion of how diagonals add movement and energy, and this really kind of captures that sense. So the simple answer is I can't tell you which one the judge is going to pick, but hopefully I'm giving you a little bit more information so that you can kind of assess who's judging, because who's judging is going to make all the difference as to which one of these is the one that you would most likely put in for. So I hope that gives you a reasonable bit of feedback. Hopes it helps you in some way there, Andy. But thank you so much for sending those ones in. Absolutely love them. Okay, so what else have we got here? April says, I always love the outdoor... oh, yeah, that was the car blow one. Okay, Nick says, I'm not on Facebook. Okay, Nick, well, again, if you want to give me any feedback or there's anything that you really want to know about or you want to enter any images for the critique section, then kim@kimayres.co.uk. Send me your images, send me your comments, and I'll do my best to include them into the podcast. Okay, Andy's saying, oops, need to clean that up. Okay, projected digital. And yeah, so... that's fine then. If I caught something that you've missed, that's okay. April says, I do love this photo. It has a story and also feels that the landscape would make it a bit better. Andy says this one's a grower. I presume you're talking about the second one. Maggie says the second one really has an art photo. Colour, texture, tension. Yes, I think I'd agree with Maggie on that one. Andy says, that's excellent feedback, Kim. Thank you. Excellent. I'm really glad that you found that useful. And April also says, yes, Maggie, very vivid detail. Cool. Okay, Nick Bath says, okay, thank you. Good. Excellent. Right. Okay, let's move on then to the second photo. And the second photo was sent in by Robert, who I know, Robert's away in Colorado with Anne at the moment. He might get a chance to pop in later, but he might not. So, but anyway, he did. What did Robert send in? Robert sent in... Now, he sent in, it was kind of two photos. So, this is the edited one, or rather, the one version of the edit, and this is kind of like the whole photo, also edited. But what Robert said was, I took this photo in the Mojave Desert last week. I'm struggling to make something of it. Originally, I tried it in colour, but since they're fairly washed out, I thought I would try black and white instead. There are 3 stuffed animals in the photo. Minnie Mouse is the focal point. There were several abandoned stuffed animals laying around the desert. This motif was staged by me as well. Tell me what you think. Okay, so Robert's been out in the Mojave Desert and he's found this old place. There's lots of little stuffed toys. This ripped apart, time-damaged sofa, and he's put a couple of the toys about and to try and get an image out of it. So this is the first image, and then he's gone in and cropped it, and he's felt that maybe the story was really with the Minnie Mouse here, and has come in, cropped in closer to get that sense. Now, but what he's talking about here is the fact that he did it in colour, but the colours were washed out, so he's gone for black and white. Now, fortunately, what Robert has done, and for anybody who is sending me images for critique, worth remembering, if you can send me the original as well as your edited version, that always makes my life an awful lot easier. So, Robert then sent me the original, which is this one. So, let's just open that. This is the original RAW file. And now we can see what he's talking about when Robert talks about the notion of the washed out colours. Let me just arrange that workspace there. So yeah, my photo isn't hanging across the picture. And so, sorry, hold on. Right, no, we're there. Okay, that's what I want. Right, so I can move that about. Pressing the wrong keys here. But what it allows me to do, so we can zoom in. Here we can see the Minnie Mouse, and yeah, there we go. We've got another little toy down here. Not sure which one this is. He did say there was 3. Can't find that third one. Oh, I seem to have made multiple copies. Obviously holding down the wrong button, not just the space bar as I thought. Yeah, there we go. Oh, that's right. I was holding the out bar. Can't see the third one. Anybody else see the third one? We've got Minnie here. We've got this one kind of lying dead at the feet. Anyway, okay, maybe there was a third one. But because the colours were washed out, what Robert did was Robert converted this picture to black and white. And there we go, to black and white. And then decided that maybe where the story really was because in here, I think that you're kind of right in the fact that it needs a crop, because what's actually happening here is the brightness of this sofa, the white material here, is catching all the light. So it's grabbing our attention. And so we tend to be looking here, but the problem, we've got Minnie Mouse here, but Minnie Mouse is then looking out to the left and isn't as obvious. Sorry, what are we doing here? Here we go. I'm obviously just really into pressing all the wrong buttons at the moment. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, to zoom in here. So he's kind of come in and thought that's where the story is and then cropped that. So we end up with that. However, we've got another problem here, Robert, which I think is that the problem with the black and white is because everything is textured. We've got the textured grass, we've got the textured, that Minnie Mouse and what have you is very textured as well. It's just we kind of come there's not enough distinction. We can't, I don't think when this is pulled out, you can really see Minnie Mouse there. You can see something lying down here, you can see something there. We have to really zoom in quite a bit in order to make out Minnie here. And that's kind of okay. But again, there's a lot of texture in the background here, a lot of texture in the, and it's kind of getting lost. So what we're back to here is that when you are doing a photo and you have a key element, and in this case, Minnie Mouse being the key element, is you are looking for ways to make sure that that element stands out against the background. Now, there are multiple different ways of doing this. We've talked about the use of leading lines. We've talked about the use of depth of field. Now, you don't have enough depth of field to isolate Minnie in this one. But sometimes what you can also do is you can use colour. Now, what I'm going to do, what I mean by this is let's go back into Photoshop for a moment here. Now, what you're talking about, yes, the colours are fairly washed out. But we do have Minnie here. Now, first of all, composition-wise, like I say, this is all very, very bright. So if I just duplicate that, I'll go back into, Camera Raw filter for the moment and bring down the highlights so that I'll do something like that. See, it starts to take away some of the problem that we've got there. So that stops that grabbing all our attention quite. It's still fairly strong, might want to darken it down again. But we're still not necessarily getting Minnie here. And again, we've got this notion of, I've talked before, and I think I might talk about, I'm going to have to do something about, might do a podcast about containment, which is about where your eye gets drawn. And when you have a figure looking off to one side, you automatically kind of follow the direction of the figure. And in this case, the figure is looking out of the photo, which means all this photo to the right of it ends up being redundant. However, I think there's also another, so what that's why you then cropped in with this one, and that does then create it. So you've got, that space to the left of. So you've obviously got that bit. I think though that there's another option here, which is I quite like this Teddy lying down here and the dynamic between the two of them. So in that sense, you might either go portrait, something like that, maybe, or you could maybe do a kind of square something. Let's just find a rough kind of, what's that? Yeah, something like that. That's about 380 by 380, something like that. And there I think we're kind of into something. Maybe just crop that a fraction. I'll hold down the shift button here so that it maintains the square ratio that we want. Maybe come a little bit closer, something like that. Even over a fraction? Yeah, no, I think something like that is fine. So now we've got this, we can make out Minnie, and we can make out this one in the foreground, except for the fact that, as you say, the colours are still slightly washed out. Now, what you could do, potentially, is up the saturation of these, but I think that would just look a bit false. But there's another option here, which is you kind of slightly desaturate. Now, I'm not talking selective colour as in you make everything black and white except the teddies. You know my feelings on selective colour. A cliche done to death that just tends to put my teeth on edge most of the time. Very occasionally it's done well, but It's pretty rare. But what you can do though is you can semi desaturate. So if let's say we go to hue saturation and actually nudge it down a little bit, so we actually take some of that vibrance out of it, so it's now looking even more washed out. Except what we do, because we're masking it, turn that to black and then paint Mini back in, and maybe even if we wanted, paint that teddy back in a little bit. And because we've done that, now they do stand out a little bit more. And in fact, if I take the saturation all the way down, we end up with that selective color, which I don't like. But we are kind of using the same kind of tricks. We want to bring this slider back in just enough so that the color looks like it's supposed to be there, but we've got that little bit more extra color in the teddies, and I think that helps draw our attention to them that little bit more. Then, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Select all. Right, so I've now got this on a separate thing. Then, if we wanted, we can then start playing a little bit more with whether you want to have something like a bit of a vignette, just very slight, just kind of help pull the corners in a bit so that our attention gets drawn into the middle. Maybe you can play with the contrast a touch more, possibly clarity. You've got to be careful with the clarity, because the clarity is then overdoing the texture again. And there's already potentially too much texture, but I think a little bit of contrast just kind of ups that a little bit. And again, so now I think what we've got here is you can make more of it, slightly less so on the screen. This is the kind of thing that would look really good blown up. I think this is going to work better on a larger scale, where you are going to be able to see. I mean, I'm looking at this on a nice large screen, so I can make out Mini quite easily. When I look over at the little screen, which is telling me of OBS, which is just telling me my software and what you're seeing as I'm streaming to you, it's much, much smaller, and it still kind of struggles a bit to get seen. But as long as the picture's big enough, I think you can make it out. So just that little kind of bit of, it's not oversaturating the objects, the teddies or the stuffed animals. It's about desaturating the background, but not so much that it looks desaturated. You're just carefully playing with it a bit, and then it's about kind of cropping and finding your story. So I hope you found that one useful, Robert. It gives you a couple of little ideas. Right, a couple more comments here. Yeah, April says very strong sunlight, but she loves your ideas. Also wondering about a little vignette. Yeah, you're running ahead of the game there. Rosemary says a good thing about the color image is that Minnie's faded dress does attract your eye a bit. And Maggie says the black and white does ramp up the sense of decay and abandonment. Feels like a political statement. Well, that's a really good point. I think the problem is with the just black and white is you've got to get in much closer to be able to make out the separation between Minnie and her background as such. So it's always a balance. And yeah, okay, what narrative you're wanting to tell and how the editing should be enhancing the narrative that you're trying to express. And that might be different from what somebody else's narrative might be in that picture. So it's always worth keeping in mind. Right, okay, that brings us to the end of the critique section. Just a wee reminder, if you're finding these useful, entertaining, interesting, would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. So next week then, I was thinking about repeating a concept from one of the very, very early podcasts, where what I did was I took people through a set of photos from the start image, the test images, through to the final image, which then got edited up. I did this for a talk for Abbey Camera Club back earlier in the week, and it seemed to go down particularly well. So I thought, well, maybe that's worth kind of revisiting, given the fact that there's very few people who were around 2.5 years ago when I last did that. But I think it's still a really interesting concept. Another possibility is this notion of containment. This idea that when you look at a photo, there are elements which can push you out of the size of photos, and there's other elements which can draw your attention back in. And I've talked about the concept of this several times over the years and in many critiques, but I don't think I've ever actually done a podcast specifically addressing it with specific photos to give as examples. So I might just play with that. So I'll make that decision in the next couple of days. The other thing to let you know and remind you of is that in 2 weeks' time is the Halloween photo challenge. Okay, so podcast in 2 weeks is going to be on the 30th of October, which is as close to Halloween as we can get. So I want to see your Halloween photos. Now, if for whatever reason you don't do Halloween, like VG in India don't celebrate Halloween. I know in India you have lots of different kinds of festivals. Do you have an equivalent of ones to do with the ancestors, the spirits, Day of the Dead, the more kind of slightly Mexican, South American idea? Anything like that, I think, more than happy to include that, and especially if you can tell us a little bit about what the photos are about. Also, in the Western culture, there's the pumpkins, there's all the dressing up, the trick or treating, guising. There's lots of different kind of things that you can do. Jack-o'-lanterns, turnips, pumpkins. I much prefer carving a pumpkin to part. When I was a kid here in the UK, it was you carved a turnip or a swede. You didn't. Pumpkins were that funny American thing that happened elsewhere. Then pumpkins kind of worked their way into UK culture, and certainly carving them is so much easier carving a pumpkin than anything else. But anything to do with that, really, that's for 2 weeks' time. Get your images in. That's not going to be about critique. That's just going to be sharing ideas. So make sure you get your photos in for that. So get those in by Friday the 28th. No later than. Earlier if possible. Again, either email them to me directly, kim@kimayres.co.uk, or put them into the Understanding Photography of the Kim Ayres Facebook group. And again, tell me a little bit about the photo, so that when I go through the entry, we do the challenge podcast, I can tell everybody else, what the photo's about, and we can kind of share our ideas with inspiration and having fun. April says that's neat, carving a turnip. Share a photo. I don't have any photos from when I shared them, from when I carved them as a child, and I actively avoid carving turnips these days. Right, okay, so that's us. Thank you ever so much to everybody who put in photos, turned up, gave chat, feedback, all the rest, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. And if you can, give me any feedback on the podcast, the direction you would like them to go in, or ideas, concepts that you would like reinforcement of, to learn a bit more about, to get feedback on, all these kind of things, then please do let me know. Right, see you all next week. Cheerio.